Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Turin here with another Warhammer Total War online commentary. In this particular battle, I'll be playing the Greenskins, and I'm going to be facing off against the Empire, who has a pretty decent little entrenched position up here on the hill, so we will see how it goes. So as far as my army composition, I went with a bit more of an old-school Greenskin build. I know there's a lot of new builds with the nasty Skulkers and very goblin-centric, and sometimes they'll bring the Arachnarok Queen and stuff like that, but I decided to just go with the good old-fashioned Black Orcs and Biggins build, which is really, really strong. Black Orcs are just far superior to Greatswords. If you just look at their stats head-to-head, they actually have 42 weapon strength, and let's actually take a look at what Greatswords have, just to be accurate here. So they actually have 32 to 30 melee defense on the Greatswords to the 22, so they actually have slightly more melee defense, which is interesting. But these guys do have 110 armor to the 95. So a bit different, and also something that's really nice about Black Orcs in the Empire matchup is Empire will often bring, Karl Franz, well, not Karl Franz, but, creatures or flying creatures that have terror or steam tanks or things like that. And Black Orcs are indeed immune to psychology, which is really, really nice in that matchup. So big fan of these guys. I also have some Biggins mixed in, so you can see kind of my front line is just kind of a mix up of Black Orcs and Biggins all the way across the front. Biggins are very, very good at tearing low tier Empire infantry to pieces. So if they're bringing, halberdiers, though they're pretty sturdy with their, I believe, 42 melee defense, Biggins can get through them pretty quick. They destroy spearmen, and they can hold their own against greatswords. Even though it's not the best matchup in the world, they still do a pretty good job. So that's kind of my front line here. In the secondary, I have some goblin archers who are kind of flanked here by Durusty Errors. So these guys are just great, just an MVP unit as far as the new units go. They're great at focusing down the Empire harass force. So for example, if he were to land his General of the Empire kind of in my blob, and I was able to wrap him up with my heroic units and then sunder his armor with the rusty errors, it is absolutely devastating. It's just so darn strong. So these guys are pretty great, though they do have friendly fire. So if you're firing into like a group of Black Orcs or something, and look at these guys fly right now, it actually will hurt your own units. But still, I think the value you get from them far outweighs that consequence. So very, very good unit. In the back here, I have the 8 peak loonies in the back. I really like these guys actually. They're unbreakable, which is great. They have poison with 36 melee attack, 33 melee defense, which is not bad at all, and then decent weapon strength. But the fact that they're unbreakable, they have stock. So for example, if he's planning a dive with his heroic units, he's not going to see these guys back here, and they can definitely do pretty good against heroic units with that poison. So big fan of those guys. Then I have some squigs here. I have an orc shaman here with the big wah, 2 goblin big bosses, and an orc war boss. And then in the wings, I have 2 goblin wolf riders. I actually like to bring a single group of squigs just to kind of jump on greatswords. They can do some serious burst damage to a group of greatswords. And again, they only cost like 500 or 550, so I think it's a pretty good trade. It's a constant threat that your opponent has to worry about. And, the armor piercing, though it's not ideal, actually isn't bad to have against a steam tank. So as far as my opponent's army, he has the Tattersouls here, very, very cool. He's got swordsmen, and he has Sigmar's Sons. So aside from that, though, he has pretty elite infantry. He has 2 groups of greatswords here, flanked by some crossbowmen, and then 2 spearmen in the back to deal with my cav harass, which is very good. Actually worked out quite well for him, considering I have 2 groups of goblin wolf riders coming into harass. He also over here has another group of greatswords, some crossbowmen, which are great against Biggins. Crossbowmen can cut them down pretty darn quick. He also has 2 more spearmen here, so he has a very, very secure back line, and it's going to make it very hard to get an effective harass in with my goblin wolf riders. On top of that, he also has a steam tank. Now, steam tanks are pretty hard to deal with, and they can cause mass routes. So in that kind of late game, if the steam tank is sitting there and all you have is some Biggins and your Black Orc numbers are pretty thin, they can cause a mass route with the Terror that is really, really tough, especially in conjunction with these kind of Imperial Griffin type units. You can see they actually also cause Terror. So even his Amber Wizard causes Terror. So definitely a lot of scary business going on. So he has a General of the Empire rocking the potion, and then the Amber Wizard with the transformation of Kadan and the Flock of Doom, which is very, very common. So my apologies for the long-winded introduction. I hope you guys enjoy this game, and let's go ahead and get started. So right now, I don't have much of a choice. He does have the steam tank, so I go ahead and advance up on the hill, because you can see my Black Orcs are taking a bit of fire, so the steam tank doing some good work early on. And he did advance with his heroic units here, but he quickly took some fire from Durusty Errors, as well as these goblin archers here, and decided to retreat. So I'm marching on a pretty well entrenched position. You can see I'm already taking some arrow fire from these crossbowmen, so it's one of the consequences of not bringing like doom divers and things like that. But the upside of it is I don't really have to worry about protecting anything other than these goblin archers. And when you have 2 goblin big bosses and then you have an orc war boss, it's really hard to dive against that. That's really strong, especially in conjunction with the rusty errors and their armor sundering. It's quite a force to be reckoned with. So right now I'm just like kind of squeaking my goblin wolf riders around, trying to find a place to squeeze in, but my squigs actually get a really good engagement here on these greatswords, and you're able to tumble in there and do quite a bit of damage. Let's go ahead and take a look at that initial burst damage and see. So yeah, that did pretty good. The squigs haven't taken any damage yet, but they quickly will if I leave them in there too long. But you can see they've already brought these guys down to 87 models, so I definitely haven't you know, haven't lost a lot. They only lost one Squig model so far, so I'll pull those guys out pretty quick. But the Biggins and Black Orcs have engaged in the front line. You can see his Feral Manticore here kind of got in, but the Biggins and Black Orcs will make pretty short work of it, so I wasn't terribly worried about that. On that same coin, he did land his General of the Empire back here to deal with my Goblin Wolf Rider harass, so I kind of pulled him in here, got a little bit of shock damage on these crossbowmen, but he retaliated very, very well. But I was able to get a little bit of pressuring fire on his Lord too, and any HP damage you can do on these type of units is pretty good. And also kind of frazzled his formation a little bit, but the Goblin Wolf Riders definitely got the short end of that stick. But on the other side, I was actually able to squeak the Goblin Wolf Riders by. There was a little bit of a seam with his Spearmen in the back, and they were able to get in there. And as long as they can shut down that fire, I'm happy about that. And on that same note, it's also distracting this Amber Wizard, you know, and kind of keeping it occupied. But it looks like the Amber Wizard actually took a beating from my Orc War Boss as well. So this guy's definitely a beast. And again, when you're playing against the Empire, I would always recommend keeping your Goblin Big Bosses right next to this War Boss, so you have that perpetual support. So if he comes in and dives with, you know, his very strong Air Force, you can retaliate immediately. And you know, the Orc War Boss, he hits like a truck. He has 450 weapon strength, which is so much, and also has armor piercing, so definitely a fan of that guy. So on the back line, my opponent did drive his steam tank back, and you can see the Goblin Archers trying their best to lock it down, and I just wanted to like send them into melee and tie it down for just a second so these Black Orcs can catch it, because the steam tank, if you look at its speed, it actually has 50 run speed against the 29 of these Black Orcs, so you can see it's just riding down those goblins and shooting steam as it does so. So my opponent did a pretty good job getting in my back line, but you can see the Orc War Boss coming in like a hero. He gets a great charge there, and the Rusty Arrows, I think his armor is sundered right now, I'm not sure, but they were able to actually break him, which is great. So the Biggins back here, they were terrified for a moment, but they came back in, and you can see the steam tank still just shooting in at those guys. So I'm trying to use these Black Orcs to screen it so it doesn't like just get a free range in my back line. And let's actually see the armor piercing. So it actually does sunder its armor down to 128, which, you know, isn't terrible. And they do they have armor piercing missiles themselves? I don't think they do. I think they just have sundering armor, but they're actually doing a ton of damage to the steam tank. Look at that. So it just goes to show, you know, how valuable of a unit the Rusty Arrows are. They're good against heroic units. They're good against, you know, steam tanks. I mean, a lot of different matchups. They are pretty solid. So he still does have his General of the Empire, and I used a Foot of Gork right there and just absolutely decimated this group. So it just literally like created a fissure in the middle of his infantry corps and allowed my Black Orcs to get a much more favorable matchup here. So I wish I could have showed you guys that, but it literally broke a group of spearmen, it collapsed those great swords, and did pretty devastating damage to the rest of his infantry here. So that was undoubtedly one of the turning points. And also he did land his Lord here to try to, you know, do a little bit of burst on my Shaman, if I'm not mistaken, but his Lord did take a beating as well. So you can see he's shaking, he's flying off, but thankfully for him, his morale didn't break, so he was able to kind of get away and get the full duration of that potion. But the Orc War Boss and the Goblin Big Boss chase him down, and sometimes when they do that attack animation like that, it makes them vulnerable to getting caught. But he gets a nice burst on my War Boss, but thankfully I do have the Potion of Foolhardiness and the Potion of Toughness, which allows you to essentially heal to full. But he's got a pretty scary little squad here. He's got some spearmen, but you can see these Biggins are hot in pursuit. And this is exactly what they want, to just get into these low-tier Empire infantry, and they will just cut them to shreds. But, you know, the one issue is they will get terrified by the steam tank here. So, again, my opponent's doing a really good job just cycle charging with his Lord and trying to stay out of danger. And, you know, again, I didn't want my Orc War Boss to get caught out alone. So I was trying to run him over to this big Zerg over here just so he wouldn't get free dives and couldn't knock him down. But he is definitely winning over here. The Biggins are, you know, definitely getting routed off by that chain charging. And yeah, the General of the Empire, I wonder if he has the same weapon strength. I believe he does. Let's go ahead and look. So yeah, 450. But I do have some Black Orcs coming back from route, and more importantly, the Rusty Arrows are coming back, and they're now firing. So you can see they're firing in and sundering the armor of this tank, and allowing, you know, my heroic units to do a little bit more damage. So if we go ahead and look at the HP, you can see it's tanking pretty quick with the supporting fire of the Rusty Arrows. Over here, his Lord did land, and he's kind of doing a pretty good job routing off some of my fleeing units, and in close battles like that, that's very, very important. The Goblin Big Bosses are great at kind of counteracting heroic units. They have that poison, they're so quick with 90 speed, so they can kind of catch up with a lot of these fast flying units. But my opponent lands, he tries to snipe my Orc Shaman, which is a pretty good play. You know, again, the Orc Shaman, he still does have some winds of magic, so, you know, we'll be able to provide a supplement to my army, but a very risky play in doing so. He does land and get surrounded by a bunch of units here, and I'm able to pop Dewa right as he lands, so that attack is going to be pretty heavy duty, and you can see his leadership is tanking, and it is now broken. So, especially with the Rusty Arrows, you can see his armor's down to 53, so he's really, really squishy right now. He has about the same armor as the Biggins here, although their armor was sundered as well, so definitely a very tough situation all around. And you can see the Squigs coming back in. They were actually having a party in the back line, chasing down some of those fleeing units, so very, very cool there. Let's go ahead and take a look at the breakdown. So yeah, the Goblin Big Bosses and this little goon squad here, if you can keep them together, because one of the vulnerabilities of, you know, the Orc Wizards is, you know, again, they can't fly, if I'm not mistaken. So it's a little trickier to protect them and keep them out of harm's way, especially against factions like the Empire and now Chaos with the Manticore squad. If they dive in and use like a flaming sort of ruin right as they're diving in, they can absolutely dumpster your caster, like almost one shot. So keeping him in tight proximity with your Orc War boss and the 2 Goblin big bosses is really important, because if they come in, do a little bit of harass, Goblin big bosses are fast enough. They also apply poison, and especially with the support of Duresi Heirs, it's extremely hard to counteract that. So definitely would be my 2 cents. Although I don't always do it perfectly. I definitely get punished sometimes. So the 8 peak loonies did really good. Unbreakable. The poison was pretty good against the low tier infantry, and definitely can't complain. But the big ends and black orcs are just so solid. I mean, look at this guy. He had 220 kills. That's pretty incredible. And the Goblin Wolf Riders actually racked up 38 kills. So this one group got a great charge on the crossbowmen, while the other one kind of pulled his attention, and the other one was able to slip in there. And the Squigs didn't do bad at cleanup either. So as far as my opponent's army goes, Sigmar's Sons did really good, actually. They got more kills than a lot of these greatswords. Definitely. Yeah, and Sigmar's Sons have like 40 plus melee defense and 40 plus melee attack, so they're a pretty good regiment of renown. And also the Manticore was definitely a perpetual threat, and the Steam Tank, of course. 98 kills, but again, it does cost a lot, so it's hard to say whether or not it got its value. But regardless, very good game to my opponent Claudius. I look forward to seeing you again on ladder, and I hope you guys enjoyed that Greenskin cast. Have an excellent night, and take care.